try and we'll know for sure, won't we?
Based on the story of one of Britain's greatest men, today we're cracking open one of the most celebrated and most misleading historical movies ever, The Imitation Game. The Imitation Game isn't just a film, it's a modern myth. It took one of the most fascinating, tragic and world-changing real lives in history, that of Alan Turing, and ran it through the Hollywood biopic machine until it came out polished, dramatic, and, well, not exactly accurate. When it was released in 2014, the film blew up. Critics loved it, historians mostly hated it, and it won an Oscar for the Best Adapted Screenplay. Suddenly, everyone knew the name of Alan Turing. Schools were showing it in history classes, people were calling him the father of computers, and for many it was their first time hearing about how Britain treated one of its greatest minds. So yes, The Imitation Game did something important. It helped give Turing even more long overdue recognition, but it also gave him a personality transplant, rewrote events, merged people, and in some cases just invented entire storylines from thin air. It also gives far too much credit to Turing and takes away from so many people who did the war-winning work at Bletchley. If you ever watched The Imitation Game and thought, wow, I learned so much about Alan Turing, I've got bad news for you. You've learnt about Alan Cumberbatch. So grab a drink, settle in, and let's separate the facts from the fiction. Because while the movie might be called The Imitation Game, when it comes to history, it's the facts that get imitated. Before we get to all the code breaking, the secrecy, and the high-stakes war drama, we need to understand who Alan Turing actually was. Alan Matheson Turing was born in London in 1912. From a young age, he was what you would call a bit of a handful, endlessly curious, constantly asking questions, and prone to ignoring instructions. Imagine being his teacher. You assign a math problem, and the kid not only solves it, but also invents an entirely new branch of logic along the way. That was Turing. He wasn't raised in luxury, but his parents valued education. So he attended Sherborne School, a well-regarded boarding school that, let's just say, didn't quite know what to do with him. His teachers saw him as bright but unfocused, too obsessed with science and maths to fit into the strict classical curriculum. At one point, one teacher even wrote that if Alan wanted to become a specialist scientist, it would be at the expense of being a cultivated man. But even then, his brilliance was impossible to ignore. He devoured scientific texts, taught himself advanced mathematics, and even started thinking about the kind of logical machines that could calculate and reason, decades before the word computer had any meaning. The film gives us a little glimpses of young Alan. Awkward, quiet, bullied, and deeply attached to another student named Christopher Morecambe. And yes, Christopher was real. The two bonded over science, chemistry, and curiosity about how the universe worked. It was rumoured that Alan did have a crush on Christopher. Christopher's sudden death from tuberculosis in 1930 devastated Alan. He was just 17, and it sent him spiralling into deep philosophical thought. Instead of shutting down emotionally, Turing threw himself into understanding life, consciousness, and the laws that govern them. After school, Turing went to Cambridge, where he studied mathematics at King's College and became a research fellow. He published a paper in 1936 called On Computable Numbers, which might sound dry, but it's basically the blueprint for how computers think. He invented the concept of the Turing machine, a theoretical model for how a machine could process information step by step. To this day, that is the backbone of computer logic. By the time war was on the horizon, Turing wasn't some mysterious introvert waiting to be discovered. He was already one of the most brilliant mathematical minds in Britain. When the government started assembling teams to tackle German ciphers, his name was already circulating in the academic and intelligence communities. The guy wasn't plucked out of nowhere, he was the guy for the job. By the late 1930s, the world was on fire. Europe was teetering on the edge of chaos. Hitler was flexing his muscles across the continent, annexing territories and promising Germany a new empire. Everyone knew war was coming. The Germans had something that made them terrifyingly efficient: communication. Their entire military, from submarines to air forces, relied on coded messages, with most sent through a machine called Enigma. It looks like a harmless little typewriter box, but inside it used a series of rotating mechanical rotors that scrambled every letter typed into it. Each day, the Germans changed the machine's settings, creating a new code. With modifications to its plug board and rotors, the result was an absurd amount of possible combinations. Even if you had an army of mathematicians working around the clock, it would take centuries to crack one day's code. And the kicker? The Germans genuinely believed Enigma was unbreakable. It was their invisible armour every military order, every U-boat position, every bombing plan went through. The Allies were effectively fighting blind. Convoys carrying food and supplies across the Atlantic were being sunk by German submarines, and no one could predict where or when the attacks would strike. This is a world where mathematics and espionage collided. Britain's government code and Cipher school started recruiting the best minds from university chess clubs and puzzle competitions. They needed people who could think differently, people who could spot patterns where others saw chaos. Among those names stood out Alan Turing. Before the war had even started, the Polish Cipher Bureau had already been making headway against Enigma. They were absolute pioneers in code-breaking, having built the earlier versions of a machine that mimicked Enigma's logic. The Bombe. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, the Polish cryptographers passed on all their research to the British and French before escaping the country. This act of intellectual heroism gave Britain a critical head start. Unfortunately, the Imitation Game pretends as if that never happened. Back in Britain, the government transformed a quiet estate in Buckinghamshire, Bletchley Park, into the nerve centre of the Allied code-breaking effort. It was top secret, officially listed as a communications centre, but in reality it was filled with mathematicians, linguists, engineers and analysts working around the clock. Imagine the most intense open office environment you'd ever seen. By the time the Imitation Game begins, Britain is already deep into World War II, and the Allies are desperate. Every German victory means more pressure on the codebreakers. Every day Enigma goes unsolved, ships are sunk, soldiers die and the war drags on. That's the world Alan Turing walked into. The Imitation Game gives us a recruitment scene that plays out like an awkward job interview. Cumberbatch's Turing waltzes into Bletchley, insults his superiors and essentially hires himself, because he's just that smart. Dramatic? Yes. Accurate? Not even close. In reality, Turing didn't have to crash through the doors or outwit bureaucrats to get a job. He was already on the radar of British intelligence thanks to his groundbreaking work. When Turing arrived at Bletchley Park in 1939, he was assigned to Hut 8. Bletchley Park wasn't the quiet little barn of geniuses the movie shows. It was a sprawling, chaotic campus. At its peak, over 9,000 people worked there. They operated in shifts, day and night, trying to keep up with the endless tide of German messages. There were huts for every division. Hut 6 for the Army and Air Force codes, Hut 8 for the Naval codes, Hut 3 for intelligence analysis. It was a secret city of brains. And Alan Turing wasn't the antisocial, emotionally detached loner we see in the movie, but he collaborated constantly, especially with Gordon Welchmann, another codebreaker who played a massive role in refining Turing's designs, who is surprisingly not in the movie, despite how incredibly important he was. The two of them together improved the machine that would become known as the Bombe. But here's where the movie really goes off script. In the Imitation Game, Turing acts like he built the Bombe alone. They were built by a company in Letchworth. Turing created the blueprint, the engineers made it possible, and it was a group effort. Welchmann added the crucial component called the diagonal board, which made the machine significantly faster and more efficient. Without Welchmann's input, the Bombe wouldn't have worked nearly as well. And as I've said before, the movie acts like he never existed. The machine itself was huge, about the size of a double wardrobe, filled with rotating drums that simulated Enigma's rotors. It didn't solve messages automatically, but it helped eliminate incorrect settings rapidly. Once a likely configuration was found, the rest of the message could be manually decrypted. It was a process of logic, pattern recognition, and endurance, less dramatic than the film's depiction, but far more impressive. In the movie, everyone treats Alan like an alien until he has his big breakthrough moment. In reality, while he had his quirks, his colleagues saw him as brilliant, dependable. He was very popular, he was very sociable. He was never described as rude, arrogant, unpersonable, and this is the biggest inaccuracy and the largest insult that this movie does. Cumberbatch is a good actor, but he plays Turing completely and utterly wrong. It makes him out to be a completely different person than he was in real life. By 1941, Turing and his team had made enormous progress. Their work on naval Enigma helped the Allies locate and destroy German U-boats, turning the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic. Their breakthroughs saved countless lives and shortened the war. Turing was awarded the Order of the British Empire in 1945 for his contributions, though because of secrecy laws, no one outside the intelligence community knew what exactly he'd done. Talking about U-boats, there's a scene in the movie where they crack a code revealing an imminent attack, and they face a moral dilemma. Total fiction. There was no tense meeting where Turing and his team decided to let ships sink. In reality, that level of decision-making was handled by high command. The Bletchley team's job was to provide intelligence. How it was used was someone else's problem. And yet it's another scene that makes Alan Turing unnecessarily look like a dick. The tension at Bletchley Park was real. Every day the pressure was immense. The workers weren't allowed to tell anyone, not their families, not their partners. They could tell no one what they were doing. They spent years living in secrecy, working in silence, and when the war ended, they weren't even permitted to talk about their achievements. And through all of this, Turing remained laser focused on one thing. He didn't see himself as a hero. When the war ended in 1945, Bletchley Park shut its doors and sealed its secrets. The thousands who worked there were sworn to silence. Not for a few years, but for decades. Turing walked away from one of the most important victories in modern history, unable to tell anyone what he'd done, which is the other most insulting thing that the movie does, but we'll get to that later. But Turing didn't stop working. He shifted his focus from breaking codes to building the future. At the National Physical Laboratory, he began designing one of the first stored program computers, a machine that could perform calculations but also remember and modify instructions. His design, called the Automatic Computing Engine, was revolutionary, the blueprint for modern computing long before anyone used that word. He also turned his attention to something in the 1940s that sounded like science fiction. In 1950, he published a paper titled Computing Machinery and Intelligence, which asked, can machines think? This introduced the Turing test, a thought experiment to measure whether a machine's behaviour could be indistinguishable from humans. Every AI system today technically traces its roots back to that one question. And yet, despite everything that he'd done for science, for his country, for humanity, Britain repaid him with cruelty. Just like we see in the Imitation Game, Turing was arrested and charged with gross indecency after admitting to a relationship with another man in 1952. Homosexuality was still illegal, and those that were thought to be homosexual were especially distrusted. Instead of being celebrated as a national hero, he was forced into a humiliating choice. Go to prison or undergo chemical castration through hormone treatments designed to suppress his sexuality. He chose the latter, hoping to continue his research, but the treatments ravaged his body and his mind. He lost weight, his physical strength, and even his focus. Now in the movie, we see him being interrogated by a police officer, and I think this is the other most insulting thing that the Imitation Game does. They have him tell the whole story of Bletchley Park to this random police officer, which Turing never did and would never have done, because that would be breaking his vow of secrecy and would have him relaying top secret information to people. There is no evidence Turing ever did this, and again, for me, it just spits on his legacy. On June 7th, 1954, Alan Turing was found dead in his home, a half-eaten apple by his bedside. The cause was cyanide poisoning. Whether it was deliberate or a tragic accident is still debated. A man punished by the very society he helped save, dying alone, erased by secrecy and shame. The Imitation Game does not touch on any of his incredible post-war work, as if the story ended when the war did. It uses his death as an emotional bookend when in reality it was a devastating injustice that took years for the world to even acknowledge. Thankfully, decades later, the truth came out. The government eventually declassified Bletchley's work, revealing how instrumental Turing had been in shortening the war. In 2009, the British government issued an official apology. After much campaigning in 2013, led by his family, he was granted a posthumous royal pardon. And it was that same family again who campaigned to get the Turing Law enacted, which saw a royal pardon to all those who were persecuted for homosexuality. In 2021, his face appeared on the £50 banknote. The man once criminalised for who he loved, now literally represented British value itself. It took the world half a century to recognise him. But Turing's story is proof that brilliance can change the world, even when the world doesn't deserve it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video today looking at the Imitation Game. Now, I missed out so many historical inaccuracies the movie has. In order to focus more on the inaccuracies around Turing, if you want a video going more in depth into how inaccurate this movie truly is, then let me know by leaving this video a like, subscribing and turning that bell notification on, sharing it with your friends, and leaving me a comment down below, telling me that you'd like me to rip that dogshit movie a new one, and any other videos you'd like to see. Because sometimes history doesn't need a rewrite. It just needs to be told properly.